Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. And as usual, our custom here is to welcome our guests, and I would like to welcome Kelly here. And I know that the couple of things that I always say about the people that show up here, their time is valuable, and so I want to thank her for that. Her story is valuable, and I want to thank her for that also. And it is my hope that we would create a space whereby she will be able to share with us all of the insights that she has gotten so that you and I can become better human spirits while we're here at this place. I want to thank you for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, Ken. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So, my name is Kelle Sparta. I am a transformational shaman. And what that means is that I help people transition from one identity level to another. So, people think about killing off their egos. And so, it's kind of that, kind of little more than that. We do that too. And I work with people on their energetics as well. So things like how to manage your own energy field, how to clear your energy field. If you're an empath, what do you do with your energy field to allow yourself to feel solid and not feel impacted by other people's energies and things like that. So I work with people on a variety of levels. And the people that I work with are traditionally, they're the knights in shining armor archetypes, right? So they're the people who love to like get up and look out for the little guy, and they'll stand up for others long before they'll stand up for themselves. And they are they have a plan and a backup plan and a backup plan for the backup plan, and they're perfectionists and control freaks, but all with a huge heart and a great love for the people around them. And so these are my people. And when you and I spoke before the call started, you were talking about this concept that you start from where everyone is traumatized. And that's really what I do is I unwind the complex trauma that exists when you have an environment that you've lived in for a long time that made you feel unsafe. And I'm in the US. I know you're in Thailand right now, but I'm in the US, and it's pretty easy to feel unsafe for a long period of time here right now between the pandemic and all of the political unrest and everything that's going on. We're all a little traumatized right now. So, the work that I do is about unwinding that and getting people back to a sense of safety and ultimately back into their personal power where they can be the ultimate creators of their own existence and then choose to create the reality that will make them happy.
That is such a mouthful, and she has laid out so many principles about personal growth in that presentation that she just laid out there. And the life that we are talking about here is a life of choice and not a life where we just drift by, and most of us do. But once you enter into that space of a life of choice, things begin to get really exciting. So, Kelly, I want you to talk to us about your childhood as to how your upbringing is, because it is my belief that that is one of the first or the primary location by which you and I are beginning to get our programming, and that comes from our family. And as I mentioned on the onset, most of our family are traumatized to some degree, and they see the world through that prism by which they are traumatized. And now they are programming us from a space of love, but they are broken. So talk to me about your family and how that was.
Well, yep, that's about right. My mother was my mother had issues. She had her problems, and she was an alcoholic. And she spent most of my childhood. My parents married when they were young and had me later, and they divorced when I was 5. My dad was an angry guy, and they were both psychic. Dad never admitted he was psychic. He just said he was really good at reading people, but he was psychic. And he knew things. There was no way he would be able to know any other way. But, Dad was an angry guy, and he was scary. And Mom was, she was the perpetual victim. And so it was that strong person, weak person dynamic combination that you get, right? And, when my parents divorced, my mom, to her credit, went into doing a lot of personal growth work. And not to her credit, she made me her life partner in the process. And so I had to grow up very quickly because at 5 years old, I was running my mother's life. According to my father, it was from the time I was 2.
Wow.
But, she noticed that I was also aware of spirits and things. And so she said I was talking to ghosts in my crib. So she made a point as she was doing her personal growth work and, bringing that home to me. In fact, I remember we didn't watch TV. We would sit around and listen to tapes that she would get, cassette tapes of personal growth programs.
Wow.
And we just did this night after night after night. So she was constantly looking for a solution to her problems, which unfortunately she never found. But it certainly gave me a jump start in my path as I was learning along with her. And then she would also take us out to psychic development courses and things like that. And we got countless books on the subject of magic and energy and metaphysics. And I studied Seth and Ram Dass and Abraham Hicks and J.C. Knight and, all of these things, all while she was military and we were moving constantly.
Wow.
And so I was constantly being brought into new situations and then yanked out of them. And her programming to me was just leave behind the past. It doesn't matter. Move forward in life and just be where you are. And while that sounds like a really spiritual thing, what it resulted in was me having no roots.
Yeah.
And because she wasn't connected to her family because of all the stuff that was going on in her family and how it was challenged, it meant that I really had no connection to anyone other than her. And I think to a certain extent that was her intent, right? She needed somebody to cling to who could be hers and who would love her. And, it resulted in me not really, I could make good short-term connections, but I didn't understand how to navigate long-term ones. It took a while for me to learn how to navigate that. And so, there was, as with everything, there's good and there's bad, right? It's like, okay, so this was challenging and these created things for me to have to overcome and heal. And then over here, she also gave me the tools to do it. So, okay, and then Dad disappeared out of my life mostly. I mean, I would see him for 2 weeks out of the year only if we happened to be within driving distance of him, which was, 3 years here and then not for 5 years and then back. It's just like he became a stranger in my life that I would go and visit for 2 weeks at a time.
Was he military or was not?
That, of course, no, Mom was military. He stayed put, but we moved. Okay. So, so it just meant that I was divorced from the masculine side of the world, right? I was being the masculine in the relationship with my mother. I was the organized one and I would, structure everything and, do whatever. But I didn't really understand what the masculine was. And so it took me years of really searching to understand what it meant for a man to be a man and what it meant in the culture for men and how they experienced life. And I had to understand that in order to understand the masculine within me. Because from my perspective, we balance the masculine and the feminine. And because I had been the masculine in the relationship with my mother, I didn't understand the feminine either. So I had to go and figure that out too. But it was super valuable. It was a super valuable experience for me to go through and learn how those things operated. And there's a lot of PCness that's happening right now in the spiritual community around language, and masculine and feminine are becoming, issues. But I'm saying this from a traditional historic perspective, not from a gender perspective, because as I've just said, I was serving in the masculine role to my mother's feminine, which is basically just I was holding the container so that she could be water. That's the general concept, right? And those are assigned masculine and feminine, but you can call them whatever you want. I just use those terms because if you want to research it, that's where you'll find them, right? So, I feel like I'm all over the place. I'm usually not all over the place. I don't normally talk about this stuff either. So I'm like, that's interesting. It's a little different story.
Yeah, we want to get to those little places because it forms you. All of that took place with your mom formed you as an individual.
Yep.
and you
Absolutely.
saw the world from a perspective formed within that relationship. And based on that, you lived your life. You made decisions based on that until you, one day we say we crash and burn. And once we crash and burn, we have this opportunity to go, why am I here? And then we began to really investigate as to truly why are we here, and then that begins the fun part in
Yeah,
our
that
life.
didn't happen till I was 28.
Yeah, some people. Mine was. I had one incident in my 20s that kind of got me, shook me up, and then I started investigating how to get out of it, how to get healed, and that's what propelled me on this lifelong. It took me a long time to really get there. I think I was in my 30s or something like that when things began to start making some sense, and then much later because I got into partying and all the other stuff. But that's another podcast. So um, let's. So here we are. You are in this mix, and man, what a mix you are in, Kelly. That is an intense mix to be in at such a young age, and having to manage all of that, those intense emotional. Situations with your mom, the moving, the unsurety. There's no solid relationship that you have except for her. Now, how did this make you feel? This woman having to deal with all that. How did it make Kelly feel in her space, in her being?
Well, I had this weird dichotomy inside of me because on the one hand, mom honored and praised me being older than my years and more mature than my peers, and being having it all together. And so I liked being praised, and so I supported myself
Mm-hmm.
internally with that knowledge that, hey, I'm awesome, I'm better than everybody
Yeah,
else,
yeah,
which was good because I felt like I wasn't on the
yeah.
inside, right? On the inside, I mean, I had that piece of me. I felt I was always very high self
Mm-hmm.
esteem, but I had I didn't have a concept of what self love was. I had no idea what it
Yeah.
meant. And to a large extent, I was so angry. I was really angry. And I was so angry that by the time I was 13, I remember making a conscious choice to just turn off my
Mm.
emotions. And I was just like, nope, not going to have that. Not going to feel that. And I just armored up my heart and I locked it down and I was like, yep, I'm done. And, it didn't stop the anxiety.
Yeah, yeah.
The anxiety was insane. I remember going into my 20s and the anxiety and the rage were so real. I would have arguments in my head with people that never knew I was upset with
Wow.
them, or I would have these. Somebody would say, "Hey, I need to talk to you," and I'd be like, "Oh my god, I did something horrible, and they're gonna be angry at me, and I'm gonna get in trouble." And
Mm.
right, there's just, and all they meant was, "Hey, what do you want for
Yeah,
lunch?"
yeah.
Right? It was just like the anxiety just would be crushing, and I remember being desperate for affection
Mm.
and desperate for love, and there was just this sense of feeling like I didn't have there was no way that I could be loved or be accepted,
Wow.
right? I was very good at fitting
Yeah.
in. I was a complete chameleon by that time. I was very good at showing up someplace and modulating my energy and modifying myself to be exactly a reflection of everyone
Mm-hmm.
around me so that I would be able to fit in quickly and make friends immediately. Because if I didn't, I never had any
Yeah.
friends because we moved every year or two. So I was very good at that, but that wasn't me,
Yeah.
right? They weren't seeing me. They were seeing the energetic and emotional reflection of
Yeah,
themselves.
because you learned
And so,
you being in that
right.
you learned how to be that way, how to if for lack of a better word, pardon me, Kelly, how to manipulate the spiritual energy to
Oh, no, totally manipulating. Yes.
make the people. I know exactly what you're talking about because I did that as well. I was able to do that because I knew how to do that. So I did it, and it saved me from a lot of things, or what I thought it did, but it prevented me from relationships. I did the same thing like what you did. I said to myself that I would actually point my hand to my heart, to my chest, and said, I did not give you permission to feel. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
I went on the other side. So
Yeah.
I was there. So I know
I
what
feel
that
you.
feels like to do that and to engage in that type of behavior. So here you are, and you're dealing with one of the most terrifying things, because I know people that are in that space, Kelly, of the anxiety. That people take medication. There's a whole big thing in the medical arena concerning anxiety, and because I'm out from that arena, so I know. So here you are. How did you manage this space, Kelly? Because this is traumatic to millions and millions of people living today.
Yeah. Well, so there's how do I survive, and then there's how do I
Yep.
thrive, right? Because there's
The
two
two.
different, those are two very different
Yeah.
things. Back when I was having this experience, the only medication available was Prozac, and it was very early stage, and it was very dangerous. There was horrible things happening. And so and even so, I never gave myself permission to acknowledge that I was anxious, that I needed help.
Wow.
I would never have gone to therapy at the time, because that would have meant I was weak, right?
Yep,
That was the
that's the
story
story.
back in the 80s. I mean, right? That was the story. And so I managed by befriending a lot of therapists and
That's pretty
having a
smart.
lot of conversations with therapists.
That's pretty smart. I think that's brilliant.
I wasn't doing it consciously, but it ended up being that way. I was like, nope, never went to therapy.
That's
We're not going to
brilliant.
count
That
all
is
the therapists I was friends
brilliant.
with.
My
It doesn't
God.
count,
Kelly,
right?
that was brilliant.
So,
You know, that's absolutely brilliant. I've
so
never heard that.
I'm not sure how it happened, but it did. You know how it happened? I went to a lot of personal growth
Okay.
workshops. That's what it
Okay.
was. And therapists are always the ones in the personal growth
Yeah.
workshops. Now, I'm just now thinking about this.
Wow.
But yeah. And so, I spent my life in personal growth workshops and spiritual workshops. And, I sat down at one point a few years ago, and I realized I had spent like over $130,000 on workshops in
Wow.
my life. Yeah. I mean, I went for it.
Wow.
And when I wasn't doing that, I was running like a chicken with my head cut off, because if I could keep busy, I wouldn't have to notice how miserable I was.
It's where we hide.
Right.
We hide in the
So,
business.
you run until you fall down.
We hide. I'm telling you.
You
And
sleep and you
I
get
tell people, usually that's why we crash and burn, is because of that very
Right.
same behavior. Because again, a lot of people don't want to go there. Number one, because we know the pain that is sitting there waiting, and we don't want anything to do with that. And so we will do everything possible to not to get there, Kelly, until. Talk to me about your until, because we all have
Oh,
one.
yeah.
What was your
Yeah.
until? Because you're running here, and you see, we want the universe, as they say, God wants to have a conversation with you. So it doesn't matter what you do. You and I all have this until. Talk to me about your.
Yeah. There will be a universal clue by 4 to the forehead. Yes. And so for me, I was 28 years old. So it was my Saturn return, which is when Saturn comes back into the same place in your birth chart as it was in your chart as it was when you were born. And I was married to a man that I had been begging for 4 years to go to therapy with me, and he refused to go. And I was burned out on my job. I had burned out years before, and I didn't have friends that I was super excited about. I didn't have a life that I basically, I hated my life. And, for somebody who at 28 had spent massive amounts of energy building exactly the American dream checklist life, I was pissed. Because I had done exactly what I had been told to do, and I hated my life. And so I was looking for another solution, and I was getting certified to train a program called Mind Empowerment. And I went to the training for this, and the guy who was leading it said that had offered me a Reiki
Mm-hmm.
treatment. And I'd never heard of Reiki at that point, which was surprising, but that tells you about the siloing of information that happens in these
Mm-hmm.
worlds. But he offered me a Reiki treatment. This was 1998. And I said, sure, okay. And so he took me through a meditative process to walk into my
Mm-hmm.
heart. And we walked down the stairs and opened the door to my heart, and the walls of my heart were black and dripping. And I was immediately aware of how miserable I was. And he's like, why does your heart look like this? And I just said my husband's name. And that was the moment when I decided to divorce my
Mm-hmm.
husband. And it was also, if it wasn't the same moment, it was very shortly thereafter that I decided to completely destroy my entire life. I literally just razed it to the ground. I took it down. I sold my business. I sold my house. I moved out of state, divorced my husband, had him take the dog. I mean, literally, I left nothing of my former
Wow.
life. And I moved into a house with a bunch of people I met at the Renaissance Fair. My former business partner said I'd run off and join the circus, and he really wasn't quite wrong. So when I say I tore it all down,
Yeah.
I tore it all down, right? I was living in a single room. I had given up my successful business. I had sold my house. I divested myself of everything of that former life
Wow.
to move forward. And as it turns out, everyone in that house was magical. And they brought me into a magical practice, and they exposed me to new belief structures and new practices. And for the next 4 years, we would serve as each other's healers. And then the house dispersed again.
Wow.
4 years later. Everybody just disappeared. The guy who owned the house actually sold the house and moved out of state too. So, and from there, I ended up on Walkabout for a year. And for those who don't know what a walkabout is where you give away everything you own. And I did that with everything except my car, my camping gear, and my clothes.
Oh.
And I went and you walk out into the world until you find yourself. And so it's an Aboriginal term from Australia.
Yeah.
And in the Aborigines, that would be to walk out into the desert. Everybody always asks me, oh, did you go to the desert? I'm like, no, that's the Aborigines' home. My home was driving around the country because that's what I'd done my entire life, was drive around the country from one duty station to the next, right? And so I went 14,000 miles in 12 months.
Wow.
And I lived on $350 a month of unemployment insurance and the kindness of strangers.
Wow. That is an intense life.
So that was quite the journey.
Here you are, you stripped everything because there is some wisdom in there and some madness, but the madness is wisdom, they say. And so we can see both of it there. They say the wisdom and madness, as your friends would say, they tell you that you lost your mind. But there's nothing wrong with losing your mind, Kelly, because many times when you
especially when your mind is stuck and structured.
And when you are programmed and you believe the program, you've done what it says, and then you got there and you are miserable. And thank God you did not do like some of these millionaires where they kill themselves. So thank God you're here and we are having this conversation, because people get to that desperate area. So you started this driving around and to find yourself. Tell me, how did you find yourself, Kelly, and where did you find yourself?
Well, so as an empath, finding yourself is difficult because you are constantly, you've got other people's energy in your field all the time. And so it's like, well, what's me and what's them? And I don't know. And so constantly moving from place to place to place over the course of a year-long period meant that I really didn't have yes, I had other people in my field, but whatever was constant from place to place to place had to be me. Right. And so it's like, okay, so this is true in all these places. Therefore, that must be me. Right. And that's part of it. For another piece of it was somehow my child brain, when my mother said, leave behind the past, had interpreted that as I can't go back,
Mm.
that somehow the people back there will be angry at me and that they will have figured out I'm a horrible person, that I manipulated them
Wow.
and that I'm a horrible person and that they're not going to want to see me again. And so part of the journey was I was keeping a live journal and people were tracking my
Yeah.
journey. That people would put me up and then they'd be like, I need to know how it ends. And so I was keeping a live journal, and it was 2002, so I literally would have to find an internet
Yeah.
connection and like a little internet
Hmm.
cafe and upload days worth of journals into it and whatever. But and the thing that happened was that these people would be commenting and they would be like, "Oh, I'm so excited for you," and oh, da, 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 and, "Oh, are you coming back through? Can you stay with us
Mm.
again?" And it blew up that idea that people decided I was a horrible
Yeah.
person, right? It blew up the idea that I wasn't welcome to come home. That there was it literally when I started the journey, I actually had a snapper turtle shell, a big turtle shell that I put in my car with
Hmm.
me, which was about learning how to carry home on my
Yeah.
back because that was, I didn't have a home, right? But I didn't realize at the time, and in fact, I'm just putting this together as we're having this conversation. But I didn't realize it that I didn't feel like I could go home ever because I wasn't allowed to go
Yeah.
back, right? And so home became only where I was right then, which is why I had to learn to carry it on my
Mm.
back, right? Because there was no home to go
Yeah.
home to. And so that it broke that perspective as well on the journey.
Wow.
And it also taught me to trust the universe. It taught me to trust that people have my back, that people were incredibly kind, incredibly kind. I went to a festival on that journey and I ran into a woman in the bathroom. And because I worked the Renaissance Fair
Hmm.
for many
Yeah.
years, I am a master hair braider. Who knew? And so I offered to braid her
Hmm.
hair in the bathroom. And while we were talking, I told her that I was on pilgrimage and on walkabout, and she said, "Oh, you need to go to this festival." And I was like, "Okay, where and when is
Hmm.
it?" And she said, "It's next weekend. It's in Atlanta." And we were in upstate New York. And I said, "Okay, well, how much is it?" And she told me it was $250. And it was, I said, "Well, I have enough money to get me from here to there, gas
Hmm.
wise, but I don't have enough money to pay to get
Hmm.
in. So do you know if they have a work study program that I could do or something like that?" And she's like, "No, I think they're probably full, but I was going to go and I can't go. And I already set the money aside. So if you'll go, I'll pay your way in."
Wow.
So, this is the sort of thing that happened. And so I followed her home, stayed at her house, and then the next day her boyfriend who was going and I caravanned to that location, and he paid for me to get in. And it was just like, the doors just
That's
opened,
beautiful, though,
right?
Kelly.
But
That's
yeah,
beautiful. That's
it
because
was
you were
just,
healing. Here you are
yeah,
on this journey, and one of the darkest perception that you had based on that interpretation as a little girl was healing while you were doing all of
yeah.
this.
Well,
That's powerful.
and the interesting thing about it is that having said yes to
Hmm.
that, I met the woman who would become the person that even today, 20 years later, am still doing retreats with.
Wow.
And so she and I have been friends for 20 years, and I met her on that trip.
Wow. That is beautiful.
So at that, yeah,
Man, that's a powerful story in so many ways. When you listen to it and see, as you were recollecting what you did and the reasons and the reality as you began to, you carried that shell with you and all of that interpretation and how you were slowly being healed from that
yeah.
perception as a young child. That must have been what a rewarding gift was giving to you while you were in that space. A beautiful gift. So here you are.
Yeah, there were so many magical things that happened on that journey. It's not even funny.
Yeah, you're on all of these things. When did you get stationary, Kelly? When? Because let's see, you got a bunch of stuff going on now. You have podcasts. You have, what happened to this woman as she were moving through? Let me ask you this question. What happened to your self-love while you were here? in this space? Because you had mentioned briefly before, I was angry and I was anxiety all over the place. How were you dealing with those two mindset, because they are absolutely powerful? How were you dealing with them on this journey?
Well, so the anger dropped dramatically when I stopped trying to live the life that was making me miserable.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a huge thing. In fact, the year. So I say that I did all of this stuff at once, and it kind of happened that way, but it kind of didn't. There was about a 9-month period in there where I lived by myself in a different
Mm-hmm.
house, and but there was this the entire year after I divorced my husband, I woke up every morning and I said, I love my life.
Wow.
I love my life. I love my life. Ah, right. And there was just this moment of, I don't have to account to him for things. I don't have to worry about what he's going to think. I can do whatever I want or not do whatever I want. There were just all of these power struggle dynamics in our relationship that had just evaporated,
Yeah.
that allowed me to just feel like I could breathe for the first time in years. And that helped a lot with the
Wow.
anger. That just being grateful
Yeah.
for my life and being able to let go of the part of it that was problematic, and that amplified more when I let go of the business, because I was having PTSD responses to the business because it had been so overwhelming. And so when I let go of that, the anger dropped more. I mean, it didn't go away, but it wasn't nearly as bubbling at the surface, right? And when I stepped out on Walkabout and I started to feel supported by the universe, I lost even more of the anger, because I was like, oh, look,
Yeah.
I'm being supported.
Yeah.
I'm being cared for. Because my core wound was being not
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
That my needs didn't matter, that my wants didn't matter. And that was my core wound. And so when I felt like I was taking care of me and the universe was taking care of me, that anger started to subside. I had to do some more active work on it over the years that followed, but a lot of it subsided. As far as the self-love, I did not even begin to step into that until I was in my 40s. I didn't have a concept. And so for a long time, I thought self-esteem and self-love were the same thing, and they're not.
No.
Self-esteem is I feel capable and competent to get through my day and crush it. I'm great at this, right? Whereas self-love is I have value and I am lovable even when I am doing nothing. And that one just sort of made my brain go, huh, what? And so I didn't get it. And so I didn't start working on that until I was in my 40s. So there was a lot of other stuff that I worked on in the interim. And coming back off of Walkabout, this was the other piece, was there is a process that you go through when you're on Walkabout. And that process is you have to learn to surrender to the universe and let it take you where it's going to take you. But then there's also a point, once you've mastered the surrender, where you have to step up and choose again. It will just it'll go from being really guided to just sort of flopping you around, because you're not sure where you're going and you're not sure what you're doing, and the universe's purpose for you going on this journey has been fulfilled. And now what? Right? And so you then have to step up and make a choice and come out of, when you surrender to the universe, usually the way that happens is that you treat the universe as a parent. And you're like, okay, I'm the child and you're the parent. You're going to take care of me. But that's not actually the relationship that we hold with the universe. The universe is our partner. We are the universe and the universe is us. And so we have to step out of that parent-child relationship in order to step into right relationship with the universe. And that's what happens when you step into choice and you say, okay, I'm choosing to go here now. And that takes you forward on a step into the next part of your reality. And so that piece was, it marked the end of the official Walkabout in my head, because I was no longer getting signs and getting led and whatever. I was now directing the path and going where I was choosing to go. But it also it also changed my relationship with the universe at that
Yeah.
point. And so that is part of what has allowed me to evolve into who I am today, is stepping into my adult self, because it's a lot of what happens when we're traumatized as a child is we never really step out of our child self.
Correct.
We really do. My inner child ran my life for a very long
Same
time.
with me.
And yeah, and I realized the year before my mom passed, I had a moment of clarity in a communication with her where I was like, "Oh my God, you have been 5 years old my entire life." And my mother's been 5 years old my entire life. And I'm like, well, no wonder my 5-year-old runs my life until I get angry, and then my angry 15-year-old runs my life,
Yeah.
right? It's just like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, maybe it's time to be my own inner parent and to stand up and parent myself. And maybe that would be good to let my inner adult run my life instead, right? So, this all of these things come into
Yeah,
play.
you're absolutely right. Now, when you made your decision, because I tell people that this is one of the most important things that you will have to do in your life. And I call it, Kelly, a statement of faith, meaning that you have to believe it more than anyone else. I mean, it is that statement, it is your personal statement that you make. And life becomes a series of those types of statement, because once you believe it, you will take the corresponding actions to make it happen. So what was your statement of faith that you said when you said, okay, I got to grow up? What steps did you take to begin to grow up?
More workshops. My freaking default, man. I'm just always about the workshop. I swear to you, I just say, books, workshops, books, workshops, books, workshops.
Oh
I'm going
man,
to
you
pretty
made
much
me
any
laugh.
question you ask me, it's going to be that. So yeah, it's true. It's true. The process of conscious creation of your own life is an intimidating one. And it's one where you have to actually understand what the process is and how it works.
Courage.
And so I was reaching out for that information. I was trying to determine what that was. And, I think that's pretty much what we all do. This is one of my biggest frustrations, actually, is that the spiritual world is just this melange of random information, all of which is good, but none of which ties together any sort of logical fashion until you get much further down the road. And so you're like, oh, I'll take a piece over here and a piece over there and a piece over there. And I don't know how they relate to one another, but hey, why not?
But they do, don't they?
There's no curriculum. They do. It's totally like that. And that's why I wrote my book, ultimately, was because I'm like, okay, here's the freaking curriculum. We need a curriculum. Right? That's why I wrote the book. The book isn't a how-to. It's here's the curriculum so that you can know what you need to do next. And I give a one step sort of, here's a step you can take in this direction for solving this problem. But it's not about the how-to. It's about the understanding the big picture so that you know how to choose your next course.
Yes.
Right? That's the piece that I find that I found was most frustrating.
Well, that is awesome. So how did you, you have a lot going on, and then you said, let me write a book because let me put this together. How did that come about? I mean, you just don't pop out, said, oh my God, it comes, we know, looking back, we know how that comes. It's laid dormant within you, and then it begins to grow and grow and grow. Talk to me about what was that incident that kicked it off and said, okay, this is where I need to be.
Yeah. So I wish it was something more evolved. So I'm going to start back a little further so that you understand where it came in, because I started off writing a book when I was on Walkabout. And I wrote this book on Walkabout that was about 60 pages. It was 45 pages when I first wrote it. I did 15 pages a day for 3 days at somebody's house when they were at work. And I just had gotten tired of telling everybody the same things when I arrived. So I just wrote it all down. And it was basically everything I had learned up until that date about, personal growth. And by the time I got done with the walkabout, it was about 65 pages because I would just add to it as time went on, right? And as I learned more stuff. And by the time, and so, it's 65 pages, and I'd been living with my boyfriend for about a year and a half, and it's about 65 pages, and he goes to edit it for me, and he goes and he says, I read it forward, I read it backwards, and I read it forward again just to make sure it was internally consistent. And I was like, okay, great. He walked in the door after a weekend away at his parents where he had done this on the plane flight, and he walked in the door with his hand on his head going, ow, ow, ow. And I'm like, what? And he said, you need to put a warning label on the front of this book that says, warning, do not read this book too fast or your head will explode. And I was like, okay. And this was after he lived with me for a year and a half. So kind of terrifying, because not like he hadn't heard some of these concepts before. But, I took that book and I continued to write it, because basically what I did was I took everything that worked and I wrote it down. Everything that I did that worked, and I wrote it down. And by the time 2017 rolled around, it was 185 pages. Wow. And I had tried giving away copies of this over the years to people that I knew. And I would come back 3 months, 2 years, 5 years later, and I would say, did you ever finish the book? And they would say, no, I'm still actively thinking about chapter X. And it would be a different chapter for each person. But I would say, okay, so how long have you been thinking about this? Oh, 3 months, 2 years. I'm like, okay, you're stuck. And they're like, I am? I'm like, okay, I can't put this out as a book.
Wow.
It's not going to work. People aren't going to finish it. It's not going to work. And so I turned it into what is now my programs, right? And so, it turned into what is basically 2.5 years worth of programs that I offer. And so it's 25 years worth of personal growth work in 2.5 years. And people are like, whoa, it's intimidating. And I'm like, yeah, but really all I did was take out the empty space because, 9 out of 10 hours that you spend doing your work are spent trying to figure out what to do. Right. And so, doing it in a tenth of the time is really not that bad. And don't get me wrong, it's fast, but it's not that bad. And so the upshot, though, is that when I went to write the book, which I just wrote in February, I have had students asking me for several years, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to write your book? And I was like, okay, I guess I'll write my book. So when I thought about what I wanted to put out, the curriculum seemed to be the most useful thing that I could offer, because I've also been running my podcast at that point for 4 years. And when I started the podcast, there's a spiritual growth journey that people go through, right? They start off and they go, there's got to be more to life than this. My life is miserable. I don't like it. I want something to change, da, 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 da. And they come into the spiritual world looking for a magic pill. And then they get distracted by, crystals and tarot cards and angels and woo, 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 right? And I see people, I've been in this world for 47 years, and I've seen people get lost on average from 2 to 5 years, right? They get lost in the bright and shiny. And so I started the podcast with the intention of grabbing people at that discovery stage and walking them through to the point where they realize that, the bright and shiny is great, but what I came for was to be happy. And to get them to the point where they're willing to look at themselves as that solution rather than trying to find a magic pill in the magical world, right? And so that was what the podcast, in my mind, was about. It was a beginner's podcast. And so in the first 6-8 months of that podcast, I had friends of mine, all of whom were, 5, 10, 15 years in their spiritual journeys, coming to me and saying, oh my God, I love your podcast. And I'm like, why? Why do you love my podcast? It's a beginner's podcast. Why? I would imagine it would be completely useless to you. And they're like, no. You're taking every 2-hour class we've ever taken and you're stitching it all together into a single worldview. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that, but I bet I am, because that's how I think of it. I am an engineer brain. That's how my brain works. And so that was when I became aware of what I was doing. And the book seemed to make sense based on that, because they were like, we didn't understand how all of these things that we've learned over the years fit together. And I'm like, that's true. And so that's the reason that I chose the topic I did for the book, was to provide that sort of framework for people to do their spiritual work in, to be able to understand how it works. The next book I'm going to write, which won't be anytime soon, but probably next year. I'm in the middle of another move. So, but the next one will be about how to tear down the silos
Yeah.
in between all of the programs, right? Because we learn about mythology over here,
Yeah.
and symbology in psychology, and we learn about meditation and mindfulness, and then we learn over here about magic, and we learn over here about metaphysics and law of attraction, and then we learn about personal
Mm-hmm.
growth over here, and none of these things talk to each
Mm-hmm.
other. None of them talk to each other. They're just taught in a vacuum of their own
Yeah.
silo, but they are all
Yes.
interrelated. And so my next book, and I haven't figured out how to
Yeah,
structure
that's a
that,
big one.
but my next book is about tearing down those silos.
I want next time when you finish that, you got to come back. Everyone that is listening to
Okay.
us, this has been such a fascinating conversation for me personally. I want you guys to run out and buy her books. Get in touch with Kelle. I'm going to, in our show notes, we're going to provide those things, but I'm going to let Kelle mention some of it also. But I want you guys to go and support her, get some information because there's a lot of stuff out there. And what she is talking about is breaking it down so that you can digest it, so that you can move forward in your space of your personal development, of beginning to find out who you are, why you're here on this planet of ours, so you can gain some insight and free yourself, man. Get free from all those things because Kelle was telling us that she got all of that stuff. She got all that they program us to get. And yet that inner spirit of hers was not satisfied because guess what? It will never satisfy it. That's not the stuff that satisfies that part of you,
Well,
you know?
it is. I want to say one more thing because this came up in a conversation with one of my students
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, and I think it's so important. There is a certain point in your journey. So when you start your journey, you are going away from the
Yeah.
pain. You're trying to heal. You're working on how do I feel better on a day-to-day basis. And then there comes a point in your life where you hit the point where things are good
Mm-hmm.
enough, right? It's like, well, I'm not in that much pain. It's not that bad, right? And at that point, people either quit or they change the reason why they do their
Mm.
work. And they start looking at it instead of going away from what they don't want, they start going towards what they do. And you look at it and you say, okay, I have made so much progress from where I was to where I am. So, like I told you about all that anxiety and dread and blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. I don't have any of those thoughts
Yeah.
anymore. They're just gone. And if they wander through, I'm like, what are you doing here? Right? It's like, why are you
Yeah.
here? Because I'm in the middle right now of we're selling our house and moving to Panama.
Wow.
So, little niggling thoughts every now and again, but for the most part, no, right? I'm just like, nah, you don't belong here.
Yes.
It's time to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I've made so much progress between there and here. How much more can I make in the next 25
Yeah.
years? Where will I end
Mm-hmm.
up if I keep going? Right? There becomes this, what are the
Yeah.
possibilities? Right? And you have to make that transition when you hit a certain point, or else you'll just sort of quit at
Yeah.
good enough and never really be fully happy,
Yeah.
but be not miserable. Right. And so, and that's the danger zone, is that's where people will often be like,
It makes me
yeah, right.
excited to because I know where I came from, Kelle, and I knew how dark that was. And so here I am moving
Right.
forward. There's a certain excitement within me I want to know more. I want to know more about this guy that is called Ken Primus. I just want to know more. And so it makes me really, truly excited to kind of imagine myself 25 years from now. I'm like, whoa, who knows? And I know you and I, we would look at ourselves 25 years and look and go, wow, that conversation we had was really, really interesting, wasn't it? And so that's the place I want to get to, Kelle. And as you said, you're absolutely true. Some people get off the bus, but why would you want to get off the bus?
Yeah.
I want to jump on a train, man. Let's try something else so that we can go and learn more about how deep I am truly. How deep are you as an individual? That's how precious you and I are. And I tell people, Kelly, that they're so precious. And that's why I try to say this to them. You're so precious that you have the only fingerprint on this planet. You have the only voice, voice recognition, face recognition, the retina, all these things, industries based on on your individuality. And that makes you an endangered species. You're one of a kind. And because you're an endangered species, you ought to look at yourself with pleasure, with just love yourself, because if you don't do it, who will? You have to love yourself, and then you can love someone else. And when you love someone else after you've accepted all those dark things about you, loving me is simple, it's easy, it's fun, and this world will
Right.
become a better place. And so I know we kept you over, man, but this conversation has been so beautiful. And Kelly, I thank you for stopping by and sharing your time. And I know, forgive me for keeping you over, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I so appreciate it. And it's 11:11 right now where I am. So that's perfect timing.
Awesome. Awesome. That's perfect. Thank you again, Kelly. This was beautiful. I enjoyed it so much because I learned a lot from you about certain things, and I do appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate being here. So have a great one.
You too.